Hey guys, it's Kiara, and we wrapped up the style guide. We have everything that we need to continue, and we roughed out how the logo is going to look in different scenarios. So we're in a good spot. We have everything that we need to continue, and we know that this logo is going to work. So we're ready to prepare it for the client to see. And you're going to ask yourself, well, why am I creating two different presentations? Wouldn't the style guide be enough? Or should I have just started with a client presentation and moved to the style guide? Well, in this case, we actually need two different presentations because the style guide and the client presentation, the actual file that we're going to be sending to the client, and not the actual logo, the actual presentation explaining what we did, it's going to be two completely different things. Because with a style guide, it explains the actual usage of a logo. So it assumes that the usage of the logo has already been approved, that the logo is already final, and that we're just showing to other designers and the client how to use it. So we're kind of showing the after process once the client actually approves it. But we actually want to show our process and how we created these decisions, how we documented them, what creative brief we worked with, and all the other details that sum up to the actual creation of the logo. The style guide is only the post process. That's what happens when the logo gets approved. We want to show the documented process to show that the client, some thought went into this work, that we went through some research phases, that we crossed out some ideas, went into some specific directions, and ended up with this brand identity. And we're not going to show them the style guide yet. The style guide, like I said before, was just some kind of medium to experiment with the logo with a bit more finite details. But in this case, we're just designing the client presentation, so we're going to take a step back and what we're actually going to be showing in this presentation. So in this presentation, we're going to start off with actually reiterating the works and the goals and the actual research. So again, as though we're starting this whole logo from scratch, and then we're going to move forward, showing some documentation of it, maybe some sketches that we have, and ending on the actual final logo. And even with this actual client presentation, we're going to show some actual realistic mock-ups of how this logo is going to look in the real world. Because with the style guide, that's not very necessary, just because we just kind of show the generative mock-ups on how it's going to look on certain platforms. But in this case, we can take actual images and just overlay the logo on top of it to show the client that this logo is going to look like this on skis or ski passes or, again, maybe business cards. Again, it depends on where this logo is going to be used and the actual needs the client address in the very beginning. Because if you know that he's really concerned with his business cards and he wants to make sure that his business cards are very professional and that he really cares about the specific item, you're going to want to mock it up for him because he's going to ask about it either way when you show him this client presentation. So if you are getting to the point where you are showing the client this presentation, you need to make sure that they are actually expecting it. Because before you even start any type of logo designing process, you want to make sure that you explain to the client your creative process. And in this case, the creative process is that you talk it over with the client, you develop a very unique art direction, you do your professional work, you design the logo, you decide on the actual creative decisions, and then you prepare a client presentation for him. At this stage of the game, he shouldn't be expecting 5 logos to choose from while you ask him his opinion. We don't want to have that case happen at all. We want to eliminate any sense of choice or options because it's going to make it seem like you don't know what you're doing and that you're not a professional anymore. Because for example, if you make a logo and you send it off to a client and it's just the logo and you ask him, so what do you think of this? I guarantee you that the client will either say yes, no, maybe, I don't like it, and he's going to question your expertise because even you don't know if you like it, right? It's a very open-ended question and there's no confidence in this work. You want to make sure that this client presentation shows that you have confidence in your own work, which is the entire point of this client presentation. So in this case, we're just showing our design decisions and documentation and justifying it with this presentation. We are not at all giving them options to choose from on, do you want yellow colors or do you want blue colors? Do you want to use a pin or do you want to use a foam? In that case, you just become a technical director and you're just going to become the mouse pointer for the client to kind of change what he wants. And even though we might listen to his feedback and provide some options afterwards, we want to make sure that we present this logo as a one concept option because this is all of our time that was spent to create this finite mark that we believe will benefit their business. And that's what they're paying us for, right? They're not paying us for a random symbol, they're paying us for value. And we're going to provide that value and solidify it with why it is valuable. So We're going to be designing this all in Photoshop, but of course you could design this again in Illustrator. I'm going to be using Photoshop just because I'm going to be using some more raster-based images. So not images that we're going to be using in Illustrator as graphic work for vectors. But in this case, I'm going to be taking wallpapers and snowboard images and overlaying the ski world on top. So I'm going to be using Photoshop. And I'll guide you through the entire process. But of course, we're not going to be delving into too deep into how to use Photoshop, but just enough for you to get comfortable and create these client presentations with ease. So none of the very fine dynamic stuff, but you'll be pretty comfortable with it by the end. So let's actually get cracking. So we have the very creative brief here. So the very beginnings of what we were supposed to create. So we have the ski world brief. What is the company name? What does the company do? And this is all that we created in the very beginning, kind of to organize our thoughts. And we're going to reiterate it, kind of start off our presentation like this, just to show the client again what information we used to create this logo and what we even thought of the project about how to tackle this. So almost like a very introduction to an essay. We're starting it off with a splash of what the project is about and how we began to tackle it. So in Photoshop, I'm just going to open it up and do a file, new document, pretty much like Illustrator. And we're going to set the width to 1400. And I'm choosing this width specifically because that's the width for Behance, for the actual presentations on it. So I'm trying to keep it very dynamic so I can reuse it later for personal use. So 1400, and the height, it's going to be pretty long. So we're going to start off with 8000 pixels, but I guarantee you that we're going to go over that. And Ski World Client Presentation. So Ski World Client Presentation. So off the bat, because it's kind of like a visual essay, we're going to go into our Illustrator file. We're going to grab Ski World. I'm going to plop it in here. And I'm just copying and pasting the Illustrator stuff to Photoshop. So again, like a visual essay, it's going to introduce Ski World, the client project. And it would be nice to have some kind of image, just to not drop it right into the actual descriptions of the creative brief. Give it some kind of background and diffuse pattern almost. So before I even do that, I'm going to go to View, New Guide, and do 50%. That way I have a guide right in the middle, and I can align all my images like this. Also, while I'm on the topic of setting up Illustrator, Photoshop, we have the layers panel right here, which works pretty much like Illustrator. It's just a very stackable format. We can double click to change the name of anything. So Ski World. We can go over here to create new layers and new groups. So we can do a new group from layer, and we can do headings. And that's how we're going to start it off for now. Here we have the adjustments panel. Here we have the adjustments panel to change any properties of images, but we're not going to touch that just for now. We're going to go through the process and you'll see what tools I use, and I'm pretty much going to try to hint on all of them. So we've got Ski World, but we want to add the diffuse texture. So there's a really handy site called Unsplash, and Unsplash is just a very large collection of free images that we can use, and some of them are absolutely gorgeous. So we're actually going to be integrating as many as we can into our document. So I'm going to go off and type in snow and see what we get. So I'm looking for some kind of image that we can add as a diffuse texture, but not something that we're going to have to actually break up the document into. So for example, if we use this image, it would be nice if we actually transitioned into that strong blue color, because it would be a very good transitional object. But in this case, we're staying very white as the background, so we're going to need something else. And this is actually perfect because we have the white on top, the white below, and we have these kind of cool Switzerland towers. So I'm going to copy the image and paste it in. Command T to make it larger. And I'm just going to fit it somewhere here. Perfect. And I'm going to drag and put it below the heading. So again, Photoshop is going to read from top to bottom, so make sure your layers stack accordingly. So one more problem that we have now is that I want to add some more actual height to this image up top for the ski world not to be so close to those towers. So here's the very first cool trick that we're going to learn. With this marquee tool, with Photoshop CC, it can actually create more of the image even though it doesn't exist. So it's pretty much trying to recreate parts of the image by using everything around it and guessing what should be in that space. So instead of scaling up the image and making it look blurry, we can use the marquee tool, select the portion that we want to fill, because this is currently white. We're going to right click, fill, and we're going to do content aware. And there we go. The actual texture continued pretty nicely. And we're going to do the exact same thing on the bottom. Even though it is a pretty large document. We're going to see how it looks. Fill, content aware. It's going to think for a bit. And we got some problems because the actual image got repeated over a few times. But that's not a problem. We're going to use the eyedropper tool, just like in Illustrator. We're going to sample a color. And then with a brush, we're going to scale it up just a bit using the brackets. And we're just going to paint it in. I'm using the brush method, not the bucket method, if you're familiar with Photoshop, just because I'm going to have more control later on with the little areas I want to remove. Alright, so that looks good. So we've got Ski World, and we have a pretty good introduction to it. And it diffuses very nicely. And I'm even just going to grab this little part, do a fill, content aware, then grab the brush tool again, and just kind of paint it out. Just so we have as seamless of a transition as we can possibly make. And I'm going to save it. So from here, we're going to start actually doing the type, because we want to explain to the client what this project is. So I'm going to do everything fairly centered. So I'm going to do a new type. I'm going to left click and hold to create the type box. This is going to define the area where everything's going to be at. We're going to have client, Command A to select the text, and we're going to do a very dark gray almost. That should look good. Scale this in. And we're pretty much set. So we're going to define this as creative brief. And then right below we're going to copy our text. So I got the copy text and I'm just going to paste it in. And we're going to change the color again to be a bit darker. And while we're here, we're going to change the font as well. Really bring in the size. And we're good. Command T again to find the center point, and we're going to align it to the center. So that's going to be our very beginning to our creative brief, and we're setting a nice tone for it as well. So we established a creative brief, so we're going to start from a very linear process of how the project began. And with that being said, our project began by researching, and we researched a lot of images. So we're going to start it off by creating a little masonry board of the images that we're going to be using and reference when creating this logo. So we're going to do a new layer, and with a marquee tool again, we're going to select a few squares. So grab the paint tool, just choose any random color and paint in a square. You can click and hold the layer into this little icon, and we're going to be creating another copy of the square. You can drag it down. I'm just going to do Command U and make it a bit darker. Click and drag it to the little icon again. Click and drag it all the way here. Then drag it up just by pressing Command T and using that scale function. Command U and scaling this even more. Just so we see the differences between the three boxes. And in these three boxes, we're going to be putting in our images. So remember our Pinterest board from the very beginning? We're just going to grab images from here and put them in the board. So for example, let's see if we can just click this, copy image, and we're going to paste it into our document. Command T, scale it up. And this image, for example, is going to go into the very left-hand corner. So that's going to be our little first box. We're going to put it right on top of the original first box. We're going to head over here and we're going to do create clipping mask. Now if we drag it over the cube, it's going to only show up in that area. And I'm just going to scale it down again. And we have a good start. let's search for another image. So something that really resembles the logo. And in this case, I like this one. We're going to plop it in, scale it up, and it's going to go on the left-hand side. So we're really showing the sun part, which is what we used in our logo. Now we need one more image that's sort of longer in this case. And I'm not sure which one we can use. Oh, it's actually going to be this pin one, because we did use that pin image in the very beginning. So I can paste it in, scale it up, and put it over here. Then we're going to select all the layers by holding Shift, new group from layers, and image board. And if you're ever having trouble selecting anything in Photoshop, when you actually go to the selection tool, there's going to be an auto select box here. And without it, if you press anything, you're going to be moving the thing that you selected in the layers panel. But if you have this selected, you're going to be moving whenever you actually click on the actual editor. So I can click and drag this image alone without going all the way to the actual layers panel. So if you are having troubles, just keep that in mind and turn it off or on, depending on how you like to work. Sorry, so I'm just going to put this right back here. So we have the images referenced, and now we want to explain to the client how we use these images in the process. So I'm going to grab and hold. I'm going to take this all the way to the bottom. And we're going to say that this text is going to be dedicated solely to explaining to the client how these images were used and how some of those actually were incorporated into the logo and the ideas that we didn't incorporate into the logo. So that being said, I'm just going to slightly modify it. The really key points to hit on is just your thought process. Just be very honest and talk about how you created the logo. So with that being said, I usually also like to throw in some icons of the ideas that were rejected, because we might have had some ideas actually using skis in this case, or snowboards, or maybe a ski lift into the logo, but kind of got rejected very fast in the process and we didn't get far enough to vector it. But there's a handy website for free icons. We can just type in ski. We can select a few images that we want and then just download them away. So download PNGs at a fairly large size. We can drag them in, 1, 2, 3. And that way, if we actually want to reference any part of our thinking with the logo, so we might actually write that Ski World first actually explored using a ski mask as part of its main form. But after some research, we actually found out that the Ski World logo wouldn't look good in this case, just because it might look like a scuba diving mask, right? So if you want to reference any of those ideas, it's very handy to have visuals. Just because if you write scuba mask, the client might picture something else than you were talking about. So in this case, you're pretty much being on the same path. So I'm going to turn on auto select, click this little guy. After locking this layer, clicking this little guy and moving him to the left. I'm going to select all three and just align it. I'm going to make a new group, icons, and again, here's one of the next parts in Photoshop. Just like you have in Illustrator, you had that appearance panel where you could add drop shadows and transform. In Photoshop, it's almost the exact same thing with effects. So we're going to click effects, color overlay, just going to overlay a color, and it's just going to be a light gray. So we have that done. We're going to drag it up. So with the next process of thinking, we're going to start introducing the actual shapes that we used for the actual logo and not the ideas that we rejected early on. So we're going to click and drag the text again, create a new copy and drag it down. And this paragraph would be solely for logo sketches, or even let's do logo roughs. It's going to be a bit shorter for a paragraph. We're going to fill this in later. And here we're going to start actually referencing some very early concepts of the logo. And we actually created some before in the actual presentation kit. If we head over to Ski World 2, we actually had the very basic outline created. We had the mountains created, the iPhone, and even this very funky sun that looks really cool on its own, but pretty terrible in all other situations. So we're going to start referencing those because we don't want to show the client the logo right away. But we want to introduce them to the ideas of why mountains were introduced, why we use an actual pin as a main form and not a cell phone. We can explain that a cell phone resembled more of an iOS app than an actual location. So we're just going to start introducing that very slowly. So I'm just going to pop some of these elements in as smart objects. As I explained in the very first lesson of Logo Core, we're going to scale these up. Command C, Command V, smart object, scale it up. Illustrator, Command C, Command V, smart object, and scale it up. So in this case, I want the vector object for the cell phone to be a very light shade of gray. We're going to really make it much smaller, pretty much icon size. Same for the mountain. You can even squish it to make it look a bit more aesthetically pleasing. And we're going to make that the center point. So this is the next body of visual ideas. And it's really going to help the client picture our thought process. Again, I'm going to select all three, new group from layers, and icons V2 or V3. Perfecto. And actually in this case, I don't want to show this symbol right away because this symbol already shows the very final concept of the logo. So we're going to go back and we're just going to introduce the pin shape. So I'm going to make the duplicate copy. Delete that TM symbol, just slap in the gray, Command C. And we're going to paste in the smart object and just align it. Because if this paragraph is going to serve as a way to introduce the ideas of the actual symbols used in Logo Core, which is the mountains, the sun, the location pin, we don't want to throw in the logo right away. We kind of want to tease that process out as much as we can because we're not just showing the final logo, we want to show the process behind it. It's going to be smart if we actually introduce the symbol first before we introduce the logo. So aside from that, not much has changed. And we're going to be using this as the next portion. Because this actually shows the logo build almost, how it was constructed, but not the logo yet. So that's going to be the logo. To get from here to the final logo, we need to introduce the colors, which is also very important because we play that off these images. They're very bright yellows and the sun coming up. So we're going to throw in from our style guide the colors that we chose. So from Ski World, I'm just going to go to a previous draft, select this little part, and drag it in. And we're even referencing outer sun, inner sun, to get from here to the final logo, which the client didn't see yet, but we're introducing the colors. And again, it's really nice to see this because the client actually knows why he chose those yellows as opposed to just showing him the yellows. Here we're actually referencing the images that we did the very first part. So the yellows look great. And now we're going to actually throw in the logo. The logo itself. So hopefully at this point the client actually knows a bit about the development of the logo. We're kind of shining in our expertise. We're going to drag this down, same size. I'm just going to scale up just a bit and center it. But the logo isn't actually complete just because we only introduced the symbol. So again, from our nifty style guide that we already created, we're going to go into Illustrator and find this little portion and also drag this in. You can see how handy it is to already have a style guide completed. We're going to do auto select, grab the background, and we're going to have to stretch it out just a bit. Gonna let it load. And then for this image, we're going to have to unlock it, select the marquee tool, and stretch it out again. So at this point, let's review. We have the pitch, the brief, the images that we used, what ideas we threw out, what ideas we liked, how we built the logo, the referenced colors, the logo itself, how the logo looks at smaller sizes and with typography. And we don't need to explain how to use the typography, because again, this is almost like a pitch, but we do see the different variations here. And we can even include that in the very next portion. So we can take this, copy and paste. Because as much as this is actually showing the usage of the logo, it's actually showing the process of development. So feel free to do that. As long as you're not exactly throwing in the text of how to use the logo, like never put this logo on gradients, it's completely fine. Because we're not, pitching the very final logo, but we're just pitching the idea that this logo looks great on yellow and that we thought this entire process through. And then after this one, we can actually start incorporating some realistic images and mockups. So there are many ways to actually go about doing this part. Like I said before, you want to make mockups of the things the client cares most about. So in my case, my client would be doing snowboards, and that's what he cares most about, and that's what I'm going to be including. There is no point including stationary designs if your client has never mentioned stationary designs, right? It's not going to be doing him a favor, and it's not going to convince him that this logo is going to be a big deal. You want to show the things that he cares most about, because that's going to reflect in his actual attitude on looking at these images, because you want to invoke some passion out of him. So for the snowboards, we can again do it several ways. On Creative Market, there's a lot of already resources created for us to use. We just have to buy them per se. So we could easily type in graphics, find some product mockups, and from here we can just grab product mockups for t-shirts, stationary designs, desks, clothings, whatever. That's perfectly fine. But we can also go one step further and just take already existing images, like from Unsplash, and just overlay our logo on top of it in case we want to show it in a very dynamic way. So not just like a stationary design with a business card, but someone on a snowboard with our design already on it. So I'm going to demo that little process. So I'm going to do File, Open, and I'm just going to open up a image of someone skiing or snowboarding, doesn't matter. So the goal in this case is going to be taking this image and transforming it into a mockup. And we're going to be doing this step by step. And this process will pretty much apply to any mockup. It's a fairly linear process. So the first thing we want to do is actually select the image that we want to change, or the portion that we want to change, if we want to overlay a color, change a color, or just paint in something different. So for most processes, you can use this magic wand tool. And what it does, it was almost like the marquee tool that we used in the beginning, except you click and hold, and it's going to select based on color. So it selected everything blue in this case. And we can select this white part, hold shift, and try to get as many details as possible. And sometimes it's going to work, but you would get little arrows like this, where it's a bit harder to clean up. Again, we also have the very manual marquee tool to create squares or basic shapes. We also have a tool to select color range, select a certain color range, and then it's going to select only that color range, which again is very useful. It's almost like the magic wand tool, but it can work across the entire image and not just portions of the image that you select. But in this case, because we want to actually change the snowboard design, we're going to have to go in manually and just cut that out. So we're going to use the pen tool for that. The pen tool functions very closely to Illustrator. So we're going to go on the very main image. We're going to do a starting point, and we're just going to start from there. So I'm going to click once, scroll my image over, click another time, click and hold, and somewhere around here. We're going to click Alt while we're still actually holding the pen tool. We're just going to bring this in a bit. We're going to click and hold again. We're going to click Alt and direct this to a different direction. We're going to click again, click, hold, and we're going to do Alt just to change the direction again. Really give it a very small path in this case, just because it kind of linearized out. Then click and hold again. And now we're running into the problem where we actually don't see what we're doing anymore. So just like in Illustrator, we're going to dip the opacity. And we're going to bring it right next to his mitten. And we're gonna have to do this again. So click and hold, Alt to change direction, click and hold, Alt to change direction, click and hold where we started, and we created the outline of the snowboard. But we actually created a fairly large error here because this actually turned out a bit larger than we expected. So I'm going to go to Convert Point Tool, and I'm going to have to take this part and really bring it in. Again, just by using the Alt tool. And this part will need a fix too. Then we're going to go to the original pen tool, just by clicking and holding, right click, make selection, which is going to give us a selection just like we had previously with the marquee tool. Then we're actually going to click the marquee tool, and on the layer of the image we're going to do fill, and we're going to do white. Alright, so that works. And in this case we're actually going to run a gradient through this, so we're going to click G on our keyboard. We can create a set of colors here just by clicking and choosing a set of colors. I think blue will work really nicely, but I'm just going to do a gray to gray. Click G, and we're going to try to draw something out. And I think we actually need to create something much brighter. Now I actually need to create something much darker because it's a bit too saturated for my taste. Click and drag again. And that looks good. So almost like he's on a white skateboard now, or a white snowboard now, which makes our lives slightly easier to work with. So the next part that we want to do is we want to take the Ski World logo and we want to plop it in right here. So what we can do is go to Illustrator, grab the logo, and paste it in as a pixel object this time, because we're going to be modifying its actual perspective. So we got this down. The next part, we're going to grab the marquee tool, we're going to draw a box around it, edit, copy, and we're going to delete it. We're going to make a new layer, and here we're going to start creating vanishing points to overlay it perfectly on the snowboard. So filter, vanishing point, and here is where it gets fun. So we have to almost create the perfect perspective for it to line up on here. So I'm going to try it a first time around and see how we do. I think that's a bit too much because a skateboard, or my bad, my snowboard isn't in this perspective, but it's kind of tilted outwards. I'm going to try to match as closely as possible. And we're just going to wing it from here. So we're going to paste in the logo that we previously copied, clicking and dragging. We're going to click Command T, scale it down, and we're going to drag it into the box and see if anything cool happened. Once we have that, we're just going to shrink it down. And there we go. We have the Ski World logo just on the snowboard. And if it doesn't look right, you have to go back and change it up again, maybe to change the perspective a bit more, because the camera distortion might have changed it even further. But again, play it by the eye. It should look fairly good the way it is already. You can take all these layers, make a new layer, Command E to merge them, and drag it into here. Drag it to the very top. Scale this image down. Scale the image up, and we're going to plop it into here. We are running into the same issue where we don't have enough space, so with the crop tool, we're going to bring everything down. And also, very important note, make sure you have delete crop pixels turned off, otherwise you're going to be actually losing part of your image. So we're going to drag this to the very top. I'm going to make sure it scales fairly accurately, because I don't want it to take up the entire space. Just so it kind of fits on one scroll. Ski World logo is there, perfect. And we're good to go. So, just like we did before, we have to stretch out this image. And we're gonna do one more thing, and that's actually use already a pre-made mockup. So instead of creating a mockup on our own, we're going to go to a site like Graphic Burger, which offers free mockups, and we're just going to try to create a mockup using this ID card PSD mockup. And instead of actually creating our mockup from scratch, it's going to be using layered PSDs, so we can just replace a certain image and it's going to do the rest for us. So let's quickly demo that as well. So let's say we downloaded something. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we're ready to open. And through here, we're just going to open up the PSD and see where to go from here. So we got ID cards. Perfect. We're going to click and drag it into our main document. That's not our main document. And actually, the way they set it up here is that we have to drag in this entire thing without auto select. I'm going to drag it into Ski World. We're actually going to drag it right below our shapes there, so it looks like it's coming up from underneath. Command T to scale. And I think we're going to have to add more space as per usual if this gets a bit too large, but no, I think we're actually pretty fine. And we're going to open it up. Your design here, just to double click. We're going to double click. And here we're just going to create our own design. So we say that this is going to be the border. So again, from our handy style guide that we already created, we're going to paste this information in. And I'm assuming, of course, that my client is a very big advocate for these ski passes, and that's where we're creating it. We're also going to grab the entire color, paste that in, because that's going to be our brand color. We want to show the Ski World logo, paste it in again. We're going to have the Ski World logo go right up into the margin, like we have it defined on the business cards. And we also want to create a profile picture, just because this is going to be a ski pass. So I'm going to go into Photoshop. I'm going to drag a picture of myself in, nonchalantly. I am upside down. We may as well fix that for now. Even though I tend to not to do that for any of my other social medias. We're going to put it right over here, and we're going to drop it into a circle. So with a marquee tool, we're going to create and draw a circle, fill it with a color, drag it below the profile picture, and do the clipping mask. I'm going to center that up, scale it down. I think we're going to swap the text. And in this case, I'm going to be the accounting department CEO and CFO. So I'm going to drag this down over here. I'm going to make this slightly smaller. And we're going to see how the logo looks scaled over here. And it actually looks not that bad. Again, 1-inch margin. Scale this up, scale this down, and we're good to go. Now we actually have our ski pass made, and it was actually really easy to do. So we got the snowboard done, and we got the ski pass done, which is exactly what the client initially requested, or even mentioned very strongly with the request, when we first started making the creative brief. And then we want to end it on a very nice note, and I'm just going to reiterate the Ski World brand. So the entire typeface. I'm going to do a smart object of that, make it really, really small, and put it on the very bottom. So that's actually pretty much it for the actual brand. The only thing that we didn't do, of course, is actually fill this out with the actual thought process behind our logo, but the thought process behind your logo is going to be completely different than what I'm going to be creating. But you do have to keep in mind that you're going to have to do as much references as possible because you're trying to show your expertise. So don't be afraid to actually reference any icons, like the ski world ones, why some ideas didn't work. If you have sketches of whatever you created, I might consider putting it in there as well. But I would refrain, of course, from actually presenting any other finished concepts. And what I mean by that is that we created the ski world logo, and we're going to keep that logo. We're not going to introduce any other unused concepts. That's going to divert the attention onto that, and we don't want the client to get confused by which logo we did choose and the actual differences between them and the flaws in the logo that we didn't choose. And to actually avoid that entire mess, we're just going to hint on the ideas that didn't work, like the very basic concepts, like, again, the goggles doesn't work because it might look like a scuba diving business. But we're not going to show them the entire actually finished vectored logo of the scuba diving business. We're presenting only one concept, and that concept is going to be displayed very prominently. Everything else, we're going to leave in Illustrator. Not every one of our logos, mistakes, flaws, and thought processes has to be displayed in this client presentation, just the very main takeaways. So hopefully you can create a very nice client presentations already. I have a very basic one attached in the actual course section, in the PSD section. So feel free to use it, and hopefully you can actually create some really cool presentations, give your client a lot of value, and he'll just be screaming from joy about the amount of work that you put in and how much he loves your logo. So I'll see you in the next lesson.